Hi, this is Dan Pertu, the host of the Muse in Music blog. I am so excited to be interviewing Frank Almond, the former concertmaster of the Milwaukee Symphony Orchestra. He held that position for 25 years. He has also held the concertmaster position with the Rotterdam Philharmonic, as well as served as guest concertmaster of the London Philharmonic. Frank regularly performs as a soloist with the Milwaukee Symphony and as a soloist and chamber musician throughout the United States and Europe. He is the founder of his own chamber music series in Milwaukee, Frankly Music, consistently recognized for innovative programming and its ability to attract leading performers from around the world, most recently including Lynn Harrell, Orion Weiss, and the Miro Quartet. I am so excited now to be talking with him about his recommendations for listening during quarantine. I hope you enjoy this interview. Pleasure to talk with you today, Frank, and I'd love to hear what your recommendations are for listening during quarantine.
Thanks. Thanks for having me. It's great to be here. Good to meet you. Really interesting idea for discussion, I think, and of course quite relevant for a lot of people. It was interesting. I was thinking about this a lot when you first brought up the subject, because the spectrum of what musicians are doing right now, it kind of runs the gamut. Mm-hmm. Obviously, most musicians are not doing anything close to what they did before. I know people who are doing basically nothing. They're practicing and they're keeping in shape, and they're playing essentially for themselves. Mm-hmm. I know other people who are actually quite busy and have made themselves busy doing basically anything they can to just keep going, And then there are people sort of in my own situation, I think, that are, it's kind of a combination of both, it sort of goes like this, there's been some incredibly busy times since last March or whenever all this craziness started. Yeah. And mixed in with some completely dead periods. And the common thread that I found early on with everybody, of course there was the shock of suddenly not being able to do what we all have done our entire lives in front of an audience anyway. Right. There's a real, I think, a real psychological element to all of this. Mm. And everybody is dealing with it in their own way, in hopefully healthy ways, some I'm sure not healthy ways, yeah. But it's a real challenge, to keep going and to stay inspired and to do a lot of things that I think many of us took for granted. Yes. And for me personally, first of all, I should point out that I listen to lots of different kind of music. I always have. When you asked me to come up with a classical music playlist, I got a little nervous because I don't always listen to that much classical music. It happens at various periods depending on everything that's going on. But I just grew up in a household where there was all kinds of music around, and our playlists are probably the most eclectic that anybody's ever heard of. I hope no one. Could be eclectic. That's yeah. Yeah. I did find myself, ironically, listening to more classical music when this pandemic started. Maybe that's not so ironic since we weren't playing as much. But what I realized when I started thinking about it is I kind of reverted back to the things that were the most meaningful to me, the most pure, and the most inspiring in a certain way, the most real, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to hear something that I didn't want to hear another sleigh ride, you know. You know,
Yeah.
and for me, that meant that I found myself almost by accident listening to things that I listened to when I was very young, recordings that meant a lot to me, that somehow got me out of bed or off the couch, or that I just was drawn to for various reasons.
Mm-hmm.
I know it's a cliche, but the first thing I did was listen to tons and tons of Bach, and I'm still doing that. Mostly, strangely, Bach, some Bach for violin, but a lot of Bach just for keyboard or transcriptions, things like that.
Okay.
Um, I grew up listening to, you know, like every violinist, listening to the six sonatas and partitas.
Mm-hmm.
And there was that sort of iconic recording by Heinrich Schering that you don't hear a lot about it today, but for, you know, for many of us, when I was 10, 11, 12 years old, it was, you know, really the gold standard
Yeah.
of that genre. It was way before people started, I think, experimenting with a lot of performance practice things. And, you know, not that one is right or wrong or whatever. It's just the one that I spent the most time with.
Mm-hmm.
So as an example, I found myself listening to that quite a bit. Um, there were some strange keyboard works, or not strange, but there was some kind of offbeat recordings of keyboard music that was traditional keyboard music, meaning maybe Brahms or Debussy or something like that. But with a pianist that I fell in love with really early on, that almost no one hears about today, Arturo Michelangeli.
Okay.
So I can hear your listeners Googling who Michelangeli was.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Arturo Benedetti Michelangeli. And he was a very, very eccentric person and musician. And he did some really spectacular recordings for Deutsche Grammophon over a period of decades, really.
Mm-hmm.
And there were two that struck me particularly growing up. One was his recording of the Brahms ballades, the really early ones, and the other was his Debussy, anything that he did of Debussy, which seems like an odd combination, but
Yeah.
for some reason he was. It just completely blew me away every time I heard him.
I
Oh,
did have a question just about the the Debussy and the Brahms, because I mean, they are such. I wanted to persist on a little bit. That they're such different composers, right? In
yeah,
some respects, sort of the opposite ends of the continuum, sort of the traditional Germanic approach with counterpoint and harmony, and Brahms, and then Debussy, which is, you know, he's so very much deliberately breaking that mold. He's French, he's, you know, and yet this pianist, Michelangelo, is just, you know, able to perform both in a very, obviously, in your view, a very convincing way. And I just wonder what's so amazing and special about that, and intriguing. It really piques my interest.
I think that's the point. He was a colorist, you know.
Okay.
Well, first of all, Michelangelo was truly a phenomenon. I mean, technically, uh, he's one of the few pianists who, I mean, he rarely performed live, especially towards the end of his life. I think he died in either the late 80s or early 90s. I can't recall. But I think it was Evgeny Kissin who, in a documentary about Michelangelo, said he's the only pianist that he's ever seen play live numerous times who never ever missed one note. never.
Wow.
And if you see, there's stuff on YouTube with this guy, Chopin also. Now it may be a little bit clinical Chopin for some people, but it's such astonishing playing and so elegant and beautiful and so much in contrast with something like Debussy or especially the ballades, which for my money, they're the best recording out there. There's just nobody that can touch him. And I think it was that combination of his ear being able to find all these colors and nuances and the actual language of these wildly varying composers fairly consistently and most of the time live. It's very rare. I mean, the guy was kind of a nut job, you know. He hauled around his own piano, you know, and there are these famous stories of him canceling concerts at 5 o'clock because the temperature in the hall was wrong, you know, and things like that. I mean, he was really off the wall. But when he showed up to play, it was like he was a real cult pianist, a little bit along the lines of somebody like Horowitz or like Martha Argerich, something like that.
Yeah.
Especially later in his life, it was like his hobby was canceling concerts. I don't know, but thanks to YouTube, there are some really wonderful things up there. Not much, but I've been diving into those quite a bit, as well as the recordings themselves.
Oh, that's wonderful. So great. Well, do you have another pick beyond those? Because I can't wait to go listen to them myself.
Yeah, I've got a few. I mean, you know, what's strange is I found myself gravitating towards a lot of chamber music.
Okay.
And some of it was because I was still playing a lot of chamber music, doing various virtual events, either with my series or with, you know, just putting on things with other productions. And of course, you know, when we would film a live concert, most of them are not edited very much at all, just by virtue of it being video and live. And I found myself listening to a number of different recordings of some of those pieces, as I'll often do if we have a performance coming up. I'll try to find different ideas from different recordings or different, especially live recordings. And you know, one of those was, for example, the Brahms B-flat sextet, which I've played a million times, and suddenly started listening to 2 or 3 different recordings and hearing how other people saw that piece, which was always healthy, you know.
Yes. Yeah.
I learned about a couple of pieces that I had never heard of that were spectacular. It was suggested that we program a piece by Joaquin Turina, who, for my money, is terrifically underrated composer.
Okay.
He wrote some string quartets and a wonderful piano trio. He wrote a piece called The Bullfighter's Prayer for string quartet, which is hardly ever played, and it's absolutely gorgeous. So anyway, I was digging into pieces that I had to do for performance, and then I thought about how strange that was in a certain way, having spent really, you know, the majority of my life playing as a concertmaster, that I really wasn't listening to that much orchestra music. I mean, I guess in a way, if you talk to an orchestra musician, some of them might go home every day listening to orchestra music. The vast majority, I don't think, do that.
Yeah. Because
With
you
me,
give it
there
all
was,
day.
yeah, that's right. You're playing it all day long, and especially if you do it for a couple of decades, you know, it's not necessarily something you're going to rush right home and put on the recording. I did think of things, performances especially, that I remembered, again, back to YouTube and live performances. And I've, since it was a Beethoven year, I couldn't avoid getting sucked into some of that. And I rediscovered recordings that Carlos Kleiber did with the Concertgebouw Orchestra.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most of them are up on YouTube. Maybe not all the symphonies, but their live performances,
Mm-hmm.
they're astonishing to me.
Yeah.
They're just, it's between their playing and his conducting, and they had that kind of weird chemistry that you don't see so much between a conductor and an orchestra. You had a very long relationship with them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the last one I heard was Beethoven 7, which I had to put on in a particularly dark mood one day.
Yeah.
And there's no way you can listen to Beethoven 7 and not feel a little bit better, you know?
Yeah.
So,
No, I mean, it's with the outer movements, although with the funeral march, maybe not so much in the middle, but you know.
No, I'd skip right over that one. Yeah.
But yeah, that's really interesting because I interviewed Andres Franco, who's former associate conductor of Pittsburgh Symphony. I don't know if you know him.
I do know who he is. Yeah. I've never played with him, but he's supposed to be great.
Yeah, I interviewed him last summer, and he mentioned, no, it wasn't him. I'm sorry. He mentioned Kleiber. He mentioned how Kleiber was one of his favorite conductors. But then when I talked with Mark Kossower of the Cleveland Orchestra, he mentioned Kleiber and Beethoven 7, just like you.
Really?
Only I think it was the recording with Vienna. So now I'm really interested to hear actually the difference between the Concertgebouw recording and the Vienna recording. I mean with the same conductor especially. I think that would be fascinating. But Beethoven.
Yeah. And sorry to interrupt, but and the beauty of it is, again, just back to YouTube, you can actually, it's a live performance, like which has this kind of buzz and electricity about it that is also on the recordings, but I find that his recording with the Concertgebouw for me is somehow more gratifying. I don't know. Not that there's anything at all wrong with the Piano Philharmonic.
Sure.
Don't get me wrong.
No, I can. Yeah, I mean, you get to that level. Yeah, is there? So you for this piece is definitely an exercise in listening to something that's uplifting, right? So, something to get you out of a funk. Is it anything in particular about this recording that does that, or is it just the chemistry? It's hard to put your finger on it.
You're speaking about the Beethoven.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's really hard to put your finger on it. Having sat in that chair for so long, you just know when those 1,000 different things all kind of come together. And it's not that it's effortless. It's just that a great conductor with a great relationship and chemistry with an orchestra, there is this sort of flow to it, and it's almost like you're not really working anywhere near as hard, because he or she, whoever is on the podium, will sort of invite you to play your best. That's what they want, and that's, as a musician, that's always what we're trying to do. Sometimes you end up having to fit into someone else's box as an orchestra musician, but when it happens, it's really spectacular and rare. I think, especially now, it's very rare. There aren't too many Carlos Kleibers, except maybe his father, who is also a wonderful conductor. And you mentioned something that kind of caught me. I'm not listening to music that's necessarily uplifting. I discovered. I was more drawn to things that were meaningful to me, that were, like I said, the word sort of the word pure, something like, all of these pieces have connotations for me in my life in one way or another. And I think that's what was more important to me than anything else. because there is a lot of, I think, especially amongst a lot of musicians that I know, there's a lot of questioning going on about, what are we doing and how are we going to get out of this? Like
Yeah.
you spend your whole life um, trying to get into the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra, and then you get in, and then you're in this situation. That's the starkest example that I can think of.
Hmm.
But at the same time, listening to the fourth Brahms Ballade with Michelangelo, there's very few things in the world like that to me. To me, maybe not for everybody, but for me. So, and that's not like some blockbuster piece like Beethoven 7. It's not necessarily going to be uplifting,
Right.
um,
Right.
but in a weird way it is for me. I don't know.
Sure. Yeah, no, I really appreciate your talking with me about this. And when you mentioned the issue of music that is listening to music that is meaningful, um, that's an interesting perspective that I've sort of heard from some of the other people I've interviewed. Um, some of the perspectives have been listening to music because of it reflects your mood or it transforms your mood. Some people were um, recommending music that shows tragedy or conveys triumph over tragedy. There are lots of different approaches to listening right now. But I think this kind of interesting idea of the more meaningful, what has been important to you as a person historically, that kind of stuff makes a lot of sense that people would turn to that sort of as a form of comfort, so to speak. um, so I just in talking with people about this process, I've learned how much um, the very diverse reasons for why people listen to music, and how those reasons really just they run the gamut, and depending on the mood and the context.
Yeah, I think you're right, and it's especially early on. It's interesting to me how many people didn't listen to music that I spoke with anyway.
Mm,
Some people put their instruments down for a month.
mm,
They were just it was like, we were all just lost,
yeah,
or I mean,
yeah.
uh, maybe not that long for some people, but um, there's a great deal of identity wrapped up in what we do,
Hmm.
and I think that's really what it gets down to. People are searching for some kind of meaning on a lot of different levels, and only now kind of I sense a little bit now that there's a chance that maybe we'll be starting to play live sometime next year, I hope. And
Yeah.
with the evolution, especially over the summer, of people getting really creative with a lot of virtual events, and not letting this whole situation get them down to the point where they were just stuck in this pit. Although I do know people like that.
Yeah.
Um, uh, so that's, if there's any silver lining here, everybody's had to rethink everything, and what you're listening to and how you're listening to it, I think, is just one tiny example of that. It's a very important one, but
Hmm.
yeah, everybody's flailing around,
I completely empathize with
Yeah,
that from my perspective as well. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me about this, and I will, and I'm going to be going through and definitely giving a listen to your picks and recommending them. And thanks for chatting with me today.
thank you for having me. Thank you for including me. I think it's a really fascinating subject, and I look forward to looking at and listening to all your other interviews.
Great, thanks.
Yeah.